"Can I buy that dog, Daddy?" The words came soft as a whisper, cutting through the low rumble of the engine and the hiss of morning traffic. Emma's small finger pressed against the car window, leaving a smudge on the glass. Officer Marcus Chen blinked hard against the sunlight streaming across the highway. 23 hours. That's how long he'd been awake. His uniform still smelled like burnt coffee and desperation from the overnight patrol. All he wanted was to get his daughter home, maybe catch 4 hours of sleep before the world needed him again. But Emma wasn't looking at the road ahead. She was staring at the gas station parking lot they were passing, at a scene that didn't belong in the soft glow of a Sunday morning. An old man sat hunched on the curb, his back against a rusted propane cage.
Hey,
His
officer,
face
take
was
a look
weathered
at this
like
fine
cracked leather,
companion.
stubble
Best deal in
covering
town
hollow
for just
cheeks,
$3.
torn canvas jacket, dusty jeans with holes at the knees. The kind of man you see and instinctively look away from because his exhaustion feels contagious. But it wasn't the man that made Daniel's foot ease off the gas. It was the dog. A German shepherd sat perfectly still beside him, not lounging, not panting, not sniffing the air like dogs do. Just sitting, watching. Its tan and black coat was dull and matted, ribs visible beneath the fur. But its eyes, dark, intelligent, unblinking, tracked every car that passed like it was memorizing license plates. And propped against the man's knee was a cardboard sign, the words scrawled in shaky black marker that had bled through the cheap material. "Dog for sale, $3. $3. Marcus felt his chest constrict. Something about that number, so low it felt like an insult, made his skin crawl. You don't sell a purebred German shepherd for $3. You don't sell any dog for $3 unless you're not really selling a dog. Daddy, please." Emma's voice cracked with the kind of urgency only children can summon for something they believe in completely. "We have to help him. Look at his face." "Sweetheart, we can't just—" Marcus started, his tired brain scrambling for the gentle but firm parent voice he used when the answer was no. But then the dog moved. Slowly, deliberately it stood. Its ears swiveled forward. Its gaze locked onto Marcus's through the windshield, not at the car, not at the movement, but at him. Direct, knowing, like it had been waiting. And Marcus's world stopped, because he knew those eyes. He knew that scar, a pale line cutting across the left side of the dog's neck like a lightning strike frozen in fur. He knew that faded leather collar with the small metal tag hanging crooked from the buckle. His hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. His heartbeat, which had been slow and heavy from exhaustion, suddenly kicked into overdrive, pounding against his ribs like a fist demanding attention. No, it can't be. He jerked the wheel right, tires crunching gravel as he pulled into the gas station parking lot. The car lurched to a stop 15 feet from the man and the dog. Lily looked up at him, confused. "Daddy?" But Daniel couldn't answer. He was staring at that collar, at the way the dog's ears perked forward, at the scar. Rex. The name exploded in his mind like a gunshot. 2 months ago. The Morrison case. A young mother named Julia and her 7-year-old son, Tommy, vanished after a home invasion in the dead of night. Forced entry through the back door. Blood smear on the kitchen tile. Overturned chairs. And a single paw print, large, canine, fresh, pressed into the mud outside the broken window. The family dog had been named in the report, Shadow. German Shepherd. 4 years old. Microchipped. The dog had vanished with them. No ransom. No body. No witnesses. The case went cold within 3 weeks, filed away with the dozens of other mysteries that kept Marcus awake on nights when his shift ended but his mind wouldn't stop. And now that dog, that exact dog, was sitting 20 feet away from him with a $3 price tag. Marcus's breath came shallow and fast. His hand fumbled for the door handle. "Stay in the car, Emma," he said, his voice tight and strange even to his own ears. But, stay in the car. He stepped out into the morning heat, his boots hitting pavement with a hollow thud. The old man looked up slowly, his eyes rheumy and defeated. But the dog, Shadow, didn't take his eyes off Marcus. His tail didn't wag. He didn't bark or whine. He just watched, waiting, like he'd known Marcus would come. "Before we go any further," If this story is already pulling at something in your chest, hit that like button. And I want to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far Shadow's story travels. Now, back to what Marcus found when he got closer to that dog. Marcus's boots felt heavy as concrete as he crossed the parking lot. Each step echoed in his chest like a countdown. Emma's muffled voice came through the car window behind him. "Daddy, what's wrong?" But he couldn't turn around. Couldn't answer. Because if he was right about this, everything was about to change. The old man remained seated, his weathered hands resting on his knees, but the dog stood perfectly still. Not aggressive. Not welcoming. Just ready. Like a soldier waiting for orders that were 2 months overdue. Marcus stopped 6 feet away, his training screaming at him to stay calm, stay professional, but his heart was slamming against his ribs so hard he could hear it in his ears. He forced his gaze down to the dog's collar, to that small metal tag catching the morning light. The world tilted. Engraved in simple block letters, worn but unmistakable, Shadow. And beneath it, an address he'd memorized from case files he'd read 50 times. 4729 Maple Ridge Drive. The Morrison house. His knees almost buckled. "Jesus," he whispered, the word barely escaping his throat. His hands trembled as he crouched down slowly, not wanting to spook the dog, not wanting to shatter this fragile moment where the impossible was staring him in the face with dark, knowing eyes. Shadow's ears twitched forward. Still watching. Still waiting. And then Marcus saw it. The scar. Running diagonal across the left side of the dog's neck, about 4 inches long, the fur there grew in pale and uneven like lightning frozen in time. The case file had mentioned it, distinguishing mark. Healed laceration, left neck, approximately 10 centimeters, but seeing it in person made his stomach drop. This wasn't a dog that looked like Shadow. This wasn't a coincidence or a mistake. This was Shadow. The dog that had vanished with Julia Morrison and her 7-year-old son Tommy on a cold October night when someone kicked in their back door and dragged them into the darkness. The dog whose paw print was the only evidence left behind. The dog every cop in the county had been searching for because if they found the dog, they might find the family. And here he was, sitting beside a homeless man at a gas station with a $3 price tag. Marcus's vision blurred. He blinked hard, throat burning. "Where have you been, boy?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Where's Tommy? Where's the kid?" Shadow's tail moved once. Not a wag. Just a single, deliberate thump against the pavement. Like an answer. Like he'd been waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. The old man cleared his throat, his voice hoarse and tired. "Found him 3 weeks back wandering by the river. Thought he was just a stray. He's been restless. Paces at night. Whines at the treeline like something's calling him." Marcus stood slowly, his mind racing. 3 weeks. Tommy Morrison had been missing for 8 weeks. That meant Shadow had been out there for 5 weeks before this man found him. 5 weeks in the wilderness. 5 weeks trying to survive. 5 weeks trying to get back to something. Or someone. His radio crackled at his hip, dispatch calling another unit to a fender bender across town, but Marcus didn't hear it. All he could hear was the pounding in his skull and the single question burning through every nerve in his body. If Shadow survived, could Tommy still be alive too? He pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands and pulled up the case photo. Julia Morrison's smiling face. Tommy's gap-toothed grin, freckles across his nose, holding Shadow as a puppy. He turned the screen toward the dog. Shadow's ears shot forward. His whole body went rigid. And then, God help him, the dog whined. Low and heartbroken, a sound that cut straight through Marcus's chest like a blade. "You remember them, don't you?" Marcus's voice broke completely. "You've been trying to get back to him." Shadow took one step forward. Then another. His nose touched the phone screen where Tommy's face glowed in the sunlight. And Marcus knew, with a certainty that made his hands shake and his eyes burn, that this dog hadn't given up. Which meant he couldn't either. He looked at the old man, then back at Shadow, then at his daughter watching through the car window with tears streaming down her small face because somehow, even at 6 years old, Emma understood that something enormous was happening. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice steadier now, hardened by purpose. I need your dog. Not to buy him. To follow him. Because I think he knows where a missing child is. The old man's tired eyes widened. He looked at Shadow, then at Marcus's badge, then at the cardboard sign in his hands. Take him, he said quietly. He was never really mine anyway. He's been waiting for you. If you're crying right now, you're not alone. Drop a loudly crying face in the comments. And if you think Shadow's going to lead Marcus to Tommy, type find him below. Let's see if we're all thinking the same thing. Marcus's mind spiraled backward as he stood there, Shadow's tag still glinting in his palm. October 15th. 8 weeks ago. The night that should have been ordinary but became the kind of nightmare that haunts every cop who works missing persons. The call had come in at 2:47 a.m. Neighbor reported screaming. Glass breaking. Then silence. By the time Marcus and his partner arrived at 4729 Maple Ridge Drive, the house was empty. Front door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Kitchen lights still on, illuminating a scene that made his blood run cold. Overturned chairs. A shattered coffee mug in pieces on the tile. And blood. Not a pool but a smear, thin, dragged like someone had been pulled across the floor while wounded. The kind of blood trail that told a story no one wanted to read. Julia Morrison's purse sat on the counter, her phone still inside, battery at 62%. Tommy's backpack hung on a hook by the door, his math homework half finished on the kitchen table. A bowl of cereal sat on the counter, the milk gone sour, Fruit Loops floating like tiny life preservers in a sea of rot. They were just gone. Vanished into the October night like smoke. Marcus had stood in that kitchen for 20 minutes, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, searching for something, anything, that would tell him where they went. And then he saw it. The back door kicked in from the outside, splinters of wood scattered across the threshold. And there, pressed into the soft mud of the flower bed, was a paw print. Fresh, large, canine. His partner had photographed it, measured it, taken a cast. German Shepherd, the lab confirmed later. And when they finally got access to the Morrisons' veterinary records, the microchip registration, they learned the dog's name, Shadow. But Shadow was gone too. No body. No trace. Just that single print in the mud like a signature left behind by whoever, or whatever, had taken them. The case consumed him. Marcus spent every off-duty hour combing through surveillance footage from gas stations, traffic cameras, neighbors' doorbell cameras. Nothing. He walked the woods behind the Morrison house until his boots fell apart, calling Tommy's name until his voice gave out. He interviewed Julia's ex-husband, her co-workers, her friends, anyone who might have had a reason. Dead ends. Every single one. The department moved on after 3 weeks. Cold case, they called it. Filed away. Another statistic. But Marcus couldn't let it go. Because he kept seeing Tommy's face in that case photo. 7 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, hugging Shadow with pure, unself-conscious joy. That kid had a whole life ahead of him. Birthday parties. Little league. First crush. High school graduation. And someone stole it all in the middle of the night. Julia Morrison's mother had called him every single day for the first month. Please, she'd sob into the phone. Please find my daughter. Find my grandson. They're all I have left. And then one day she stopped calling. Not because she'd given up hope, Marcus realized, but because hearing his voice say, nothing yet, was killing her slowly. He'd failed them. Failed Tommy. Failed Julia. Failed that grandmother whose voice haunted his dreams. And now, standing in a gas station parking lot with the dog he'd been searching for staring up at him like a messenger from the dead, Marcus felt 8 weeks of guilt and grief and rage compress into a single burning point of purpose. Shadow hadn't given up. Which meant somewhere out there, in those woods where Marcus had screamed himself hoarse, Tommy Morrison might still be waiting. Still hoping. Still believing someone would come. I'm coming, kid, Marcus whispered to the empty air, to the ghost of a 7-year-old he'd never met. I swear to God I'm coming. Shadow barked once. Sure. Urgent. Like he'd been waiting 8 weeks to hear those words. If you've ever felt like you failed someone you were supposed to protect, drop a broken heart in the comments. And if you believe Tommy's still out there waiting, type, "Don't give up," below. Marcus needs to know we're with him. Marcus turned to face the old man fully for the first time, really seeing him. Not just a homeless figure beside a dog, but a person. A man whose eyes held the kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving rather than living. Deep lines carved into sun-weathered skin. Hands that trembled slightly, knuckles swollen and arthritic. The torn canvas jacket hung off shoulders that had once been broader, stronger, before life wore them down to bone. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice gentler now, "I need you to tell me everything. Where exactly did you find him? When? Was he injured? Was he alone?" The old man's gaze drifted to Shadow, something like regret flickering across his face. When he spoke, his voice cracked with the rawness of someone who hadn't had a real conversation in weeks. 3 weeks back. Maybe 20 days now, I lose track. He gestured vaguely toward the east. Down by the Clearwater River, near the old logging trail. I was camped there, trying to stay out of sight, you know how it is. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He knew that trail. He'd searched it. Twice. It was early morning, still dark. I heard something moving through the brush. Thought it was a coyote at first, maybe a bear. But then he came limping out of the tree line. The old man's voice softened, became almost tender. Barely standing. Left front paw all torn up, bleeding. Ribs showing through his fur like he hadn't eaten in weeks. But his eyes. He paused, swallowing hard. His eyes were still fighting. Still had that look like he wasn't done yet. Shadow whined softly as if remembering. I gave him what I had. Half a can of beans. Some jerky I'd been saving. He ate like he'd been starving, but gentle, you know? Didn't snap or growl. Just grateful. The old man's voice broke completely. I wrapped his paw in a shirt I had. Cleaned it best I could with river water. He stayed with me. Slept right beside my tent that first night like we were old friends. Marcus felt his throat tighten. This man who had nothing had given everything he could to save a dog that wasn't even his. But he wouldn't settle, the old man continued, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. Every night he'd pace. Stand at the edge of camp and stare into the woods, whining. Like he was being called back to something. I tried to follow him once, but my knees. He gestured to his legs, to the way he sat with one leg stretched out stiffly. I can't move like I used to. And he'd go deep into the brush where I couldn't follow. Why bring him here? Marcus asked. Why sell him? The old man's face crumpled. I haven't eaten in 2 days, officer. I can barely feed myself, and he needs more than I can give him. He needs someone who can help him finish whatever it is he's trying to do. A tear tracked down through the dirt on his cheek. I see the way he looks at those woods. He's got unfinished business. A purpose. And I'm just in his way. Marcus felt something break open in his chest. This man, broken and forgotten by the world, had recognized what Shadow needed when no one else had. Had kept him alive. Had brought him here to this exact gas station at this exact time so Marcus could find him. What's your name? Marcus asked quietly. Walter. Walter Green. Walter, Marcus said, pulling out his wallet. You didn't fail him. You saved him. And you might have just saved a little boy's life too. He pressed every bill he had into Walter's shaking hands. Maybe $200. This isn't payment. This is thank you. For not giving up on him when you had every reason to. Walter stared at the money, then at Marcus, tears streaming freely now. You think the boy's still alive? Marcus looked at Shadow, at those dark eyes still burning with purpose. I think this dog's been trying to tell us that for 8 weeks. And I think we're finally listening. Shadow barked. What? Sure. Like confirmation. Like a promise he intended to keep. If someone's kindness ever saved you when you had nothing left, drop a folded hands below. And if you think Walter's a hero too, type, thank you Walter, in the comments. Some angels don't have wings. Some have torn jackets and empty pockets but hearts full of gold. Marcus was about to turn toward his car when Shadow suddenly moved. Not toward the woods. Not toward Emma waiting in the vehicle. But toward the small burlap sack sitting beside Walter's cardboard sign. The dog's nose pressed against the worn fabric, and he released a sound Marcus had never heard before. A whimper so desperate, so human, it made his skin prickle with goosebumps. "What is it, boy?" Marcus knelt beside the sack, his heart already accelerating before he even knew why. Shadow pawed at the bag, his claws scraping against the rough material with increasing urgency. "What? Twice? 3 times. Each scratch more frantic than the last." Walter's eyes widened. "He's never done that before. That bag's been with me for weeks and he never even looked at it twice." Marcus's hands moved on instinct, reaching for the sack. "May I?" Walter nodded, confusion etched across his weathered face. The bag was light, nearly empty. Marcus loosened the drawstring and looked inside. At first he saw nothing but a few old rags, a dented can of soup, a plastic water bottle. But Shadow whined again, higher pitched this time, and stuck his entire snout into the opening, pushing past Marcus's hands. "Easy, boy, easy." Marcus pulled back a stained rag and his breath stopped. There, tangled in a corner of the bag, was a bracelet. Small. Child-sized. The kind made from brown leather cord with a metal plate in the center. The kind a mother might give her son so he'd always have something to remember her by. Marcus's hands shook as he lifted it into the light. The metal plate was scratched and dented, but the engraving was still visible, each letter burned into his retinas like a brand, Tommy. The world went silent. No traffic. No wind. No birdsong. Just the sound of his own blood rushing in his ears and Shadow's desperate, heartbroken whining. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered. "Oh my God, Tommy." Shadow barked, sharp, piercing, accusatory. As if saying, "Finally, finally you see it, finally you understand." The dog's paw came down on Marcus's wrist, claws pressing into his skin with enough force to leave marks. Not aggressive. Pleading. "Where did this come from?" Marcus's voice cracked as he turned to Walter. "This bracelet. Where?" Walter's face had gone pale. I don't know. That bag's been with me for 2 years. I pick up things, whatever I find. Bottles, cans, sometimes people drop things and..." His voice trailed off as the weight of it hit him. "You think that's from the missing boy?" "It's his," Marcus said, each word thick with emotion. "Tommy Morrison. 7 years old. Missing for 8 weeks. This is his." He held the bracelet up, his hand trembling so violently the metal plate caught the sunlight and flashed like a signal flare. Shadow threw his head back and howled. Long, mournful. The sound of 8 weeks of searching, 8 weeks of loyalty, 8 weeks of trying to lead someone, anyone, back to the child he'd sworn to protect. The sound shattered something in Marcus's chest, and suddenly he was on his knees in that gas station parking lot, this tiny bracelet clutched in his fist like a lifeline, tears streaming down his face. "He's been carrying this, hasn't he?" Marcus looked at Walter through blurred vision. "Shadow. He's been trying to show someone. He found your bag, maybe dragged it, maybe dropped the bracelet in there himself. He's been trying to tell us Tommy's alive." Walter's own eyes glistened. "My God. All this time." Shadow barked again. Urgent. Insistent. He spun in a tight circle, then bolted 3 steps toward the tree line before stopping, looking back at Marcus with eyes that screamed, Now, we go now." Marcus stood, legs shaking, and turned toward his patrol car where Emma watched with her small hands pressed against the window. He raised his radio with one hand, the bracelet clutched in the other like a sacred relic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need backup K9 units and search and rescue to my location immediately. I have evidence in the Morrison case. I think I know where Tommy is." Shadow barked once more. Triumphant. Determined. Finally. If your heart is racing right now, drop a high voltage in the comments. And if you're screaming Geo, find him now, type it below. Let Marcus know we're all running with him. Tommy's waited long enough. Marcus lowered the radio, his chest heaving like he'd just run a marathon. Backup was coming, but they were 20 minutes out. 20 minutes while Tommy Morrison, if he was still alive, if Shadow was right, if this wasn't all some cruel cosmic joke, waited in whatever hell he'd been trapped in for 8 weeks. 20 minutes felt like a death sentence. Shadow paced in tight, agitated circles, his eyes locked on the tree line, his body vibrating with barely contained urgency. Every few seconds he'd look back at Marcus, then at the woods, then at Marcus again. The message was clear. We're wasting time. Every second counts. Marcus turned to Walter, and what came out of his mouth wasn't an order or a demand. It was something raw. Something that stripped away the badge and the uniform and left only a man who'd been haunted by a child's face for 8 weeks. "Walter," he said, his voice breaking on the first syllable, "I need him. I need Shadow. Not forever. Just long enough to follow where he leads. Please." The word came out like a prayer. That little boy has been out there alone since October. If there's even a chance he's still breathing, still hoping someone's coming for him, I can't wait 20 minutes. I can't let him wait one more second thinking nobody's looking for him. Walter's weathered face crumpled, tears cutting fresh tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "Officer, he was never mine to keep. He was always that boy's. I was just keeping him safe until you showed up." Marcus felt something crack wide open in his chest. He dropped to one knee in front of Walter, eye level now, and gripped the old man's trembling shoulder. "You did more than keep him safe. You gave him a reason to keep fighting. You fed him when you were starving. You wrapped his wounds with the shirt off your back. You brought him here, to this exact spot, at this exact moment." His voice shattered. "You're the reason we might save Tommy's life. Do you understand that? You're the reason." Walter nodded, unable to speak, his whole body shaking with sobs he'd probably been holding back for years. Shadow barked once, sharp, commanding, and suddenly pressed his body against Marcus's leg. Not sitting. Not waiting anymore. Pushing. Insisting. The dog looked up at him with eyes that held intelligence, desperation, and something that looked impossibly like trust. Like he'd been searching for 8 weeks for someone who could do what he couldn't. Someone with hands to dig, a voice to call for help, a badge to make the world listen. And he'd finally found him. "He's been waiting for you," Walter whispered. "All this time. He's been waiting for someone who could finish it." Marcus looked at his daughter through the car window. Emma's small face was streaked with tears, her pink bow crooked, her hands pressed flat against the glass. She mouthed 2 words, "Save him." His little girl understood. Somehow, at 6 years old, she understood that they were standing at the edge of something that mattered more than getting home on time, more than sleep, more than safety. Marcus stood, his decision made. He looked at Shadow, really looked at him, and saw past the matted fur and torn paw and jutting ribs. He saw loyalty that refused to die. He saw courage that wouldn't quit. He saw a hero in a dog's body who'd been screaming into the void for 8 weeks, begging someone to listen. "Okay, boy," Marcus said, his voice steady now, hardened by purpose. Show me where he is. Take me to Tommy." Shadow's entire body went rigid. His ears shot forward. His tail, which had been tucked low, suddenly lifted like a flag. And then he ran. Not toward the trees. Toward Marcus's patrol car. He stopped at the passenger door, barking once, looking back with eyes that said, "Hurry, hurry, hurry." Marcus turned to Walter one last time. "When backup gets here, tell them Officer Chen went into the woods off mile marker 47 with the dog from the Morrison case. Tell them to follow. Tell them." His voice broke again. "Tell them we're bringing Tommy home." Walter saluted. A broken old man in a torn jacket, saluting like he was sending a soldier into battle. "Bring that boy home, officer. Bring him home. If you're crying, you're not alone. Drop a blue heart if you believe in Shadow. And type, 'Bring him home,' if you're ready to run into those woods with Marcus. Tommy's waited 8 weeks. Let's finish this together." The patrol car tore down Highway 49, sirens silent but lights flashing, Marcus's foot pressing the accelerator until the engine screamed. Emma sat buckled in the back seat, her small hands gripping the door handle, her eyes wide but determined. Anne in the passenger seat, Shadow stood with his front paws on the dashboard, his nose pressed against the windshield, body trembling like a racehorse at the starting gate. "It's okay, baby," Marcus called back to Emma, his voice tight. "Daddy's got this." But his hands were shaking on the wheel. Because he'd been to these woods before. He'd walked these trails. He'd called Tommy's name until his throat bled. And he'd found nothing. Nothing but silence and shadows and the crushing weight of failure. What if he was wrong? What if Shadow was just a traumatized dog chasing ghosts? What if Tommy had been dead since October and they were racing toward nothing but heartbreak? Mile marker 47 appeared through the trees. Marcus's chest tightened. This was it. The exact spot where Julia Morrison's car had been found abandoned on October 16th, doors open, keys still in the ignition, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like desperate searchlights. The spot where her trail had gone cold, where every lead had died. He pulled onto the narrow shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. The forest loomed ahead, dense, dark, unwelcoming. 60,000 acres of wilderness. Places where you could scream for help and no one would ever hear you. Places where a 7-year-old boy could vanish like smoke. Marcus killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Shadow's whining cut through it like a knife. He scratched at the door, his claws leaving marks on the interior panel, his entire body coiled with desperate energy. The moment Marcus opened the passenger door, Shadow exploded from the car like he'd been shot from a cannon. But he didn't run into the woods. Not yet. He ran to the exact spot where Julia's car had been parked 8 weeks ago. The tire impressions were still visible in the dirt, faint but unmistakable. Shadow circled the area once, twice, his nose to the ground, his breathing rapid and sharp. And then he stopped. Right at the tree line. Right where the pavement ended and the wilderness began. He looked back at Marcus. And the sound that came out of him wasn't a bark. It was something older. Primal. A howl that carried 8 weeks of pain, 8 weeks of searching, 8 weeks of refusing to abandon the boy he loved. Marcus's vision blurred. He grabbed his flashlight and radio, his service weapon heavy on his hip. Emma climbed out of the back seat, and he immediately knelt in front of her, gripping her small shoulders. "Sweetheart, I need you to stay in the car. Lock the doors. Backup is coming. If anyone besides me or another police officer tries to open these doors, you call 911 on my radio, okay?" Emma's bottom lip trembled. "Daddy, what if you don't come back?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He pulled her into his chest, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling her small heart hammering against his uniform. "I'm coming back," he whispered fiercely. "I promise you, baby girl. I'm coming back. And I'm bringing that little boy with me. You promise?" "I promise." She pulled back, her eyes, so much like her mother's, searching his face. Then she nodded, climbed back into the car, and locked the doors with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Marcus stood, turned, faced the woods that had haunted him for 8 weeks. Shadow was already 20 feet ahead, positioned at the edge of the trail, his body a coiled spring. Waiting. The late morning sun filtered through the canopy, casting long shadows that looked like reaching fingers. Marcus took a breath, checked his radio, tightened his grip on the flashlight. "Okay, Shadow," he said, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his throat. "Show me. Take me to him. Take me to Tommy." Shadow tilted his head back and howled once more, long, mournful, defiant. A sound that said, "I never gave up. I never forgot. And now, finally, we finish this." And then he ran into the darkness. Marcus followed. Behind him, through the rear window of the patrol car, Emma pressed her small hand against the glass. A prayer. A blessing. A little girl's faith that her daddy was a hero. He couldn't let her down. He wouldn't. If you've ever made a promise you die to keep, drop a high voltage in the comments. And if you're holding your breath right now, type, "Go Marcus, go." The woods are waiting. Tommy's waiting. Let's bring him home. Shadow didn't follow the trail. He veered left, crashing through underbrush so thick Marcus could barely see 3 feet ahead. Branches whipped across his face, thorns tearing at his uniform, mud sucking at his boots with every desperate step. His radio crackled against his hip, dispatch calling his name, backup asking for his position, but he couldn't stop to answer. Couldn't slow down. Because 30 feet ahead, Shadow was running like his life depended on it. Like Tommy's life depended on it. "Shadow, wait." Marcus gasped, his lungs burning, but the dog didn't slow. If anything, he accelerated, his tan and black form weaving between trees with the precision of someone who'd run this path 100 times before. In his mind, in his dreams. In every waking moment of the past 8 weeks, Marcus's flashlight beam cut through the shadows, illuminating twisted roots that seemed designed to trip him, fallen logs that forced him to vault over them, streams of cold water that soaked through his boots. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Adrenaline flooded his system until his hands stopped shaking and his vision sharpened to a razor's edge. This was it. This was the moment 8 weeks had been building toward. "Tommy?" Marcus shouted into the wilderness, his voice cracking. "Tommy Morrison, can you hear me? It's the police. We're coming for you." Only silence answered. The kind of silence that swallows hope whole. Shadow suddenly stopped, so abruptly that Marcus nearly collided with him. The dog stood rigid, ears pinned forward, nose pointed toward a dense thicket of overgrown bushes and fallen timber. His breathing came fast and shallow, steam rising from his mouth in the cool forest air. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered, dropping to one knee beside him. "Is he here? Is Tommy here?" Shadow whined, high, urgent, trembling. His paw lifted and came down 3 times in rapid succession. Digging. Pointing. "Here. Right here. Under this." Marcus's heart stopped. He swept his flashlight across the area and saw it, partially hidden beneath layers of dead leaves and broken branches, a piece of blue fabric. Faded. Torn. But unmistakably a child's jacket. The same jacket Tommy Morrison had been wearing in the missing person's photo. "Oh God," Marcus breathed. His hands moved on instinct, ripping away branches, tearing at leaves, his fingers bleeding from thorns he couldn't even feel. Shadow dug beside him, both of them clawing at the earth like men possessed. Dirt flew. Branches cracked. Marcus's breath came in ragged sobs because what if they were too late? What if after all this, after 8 weeks, after Shadow's impossible loyalty, they found only... His flashlight beam hit something that made the world stop. A small hand. Pale. Motionless. Partially covered in dirt and leaves. "No," Marcus whispered. "No, no, no, please God, no." He dug faster, his voice rising to a scream. "Tommy? Tommy, can you hear me?" Shadow's barking became frantic, desperate. He pawed at the ground beside the hand, his claws scraping against something solid. What? Blanks. A structure of some kind hidden beneath the forest floor. A shelter. Marcus's radio crackled. "Unit 12, what's your location?" "We're entering the woods now. Mile marker 47, 300 yards northwest into the brush." Marcus shouted into the radio, his voice breaking. "I found something. I need medical, I need..." And then the hand moved. Just barely. A finger. A twitch so small it could have been his imagination, except Shadow saw it too and released a sound that was half bark, half cry of pure joy. "He's alive," Marcus sobbed. "Dear God, he's alive. Tommy, hold on, buddy. Hold on. We're here. We found you. You're safe now." He tore away more debris, revealing a crude shelter built into a fallen tree, logs and branches woven together like a desperate fortress. And inside, curled in a ball, shaking violently, covered in dirt and blood and 8 weeks of terror, was Tommy Morrison. His eyes, sunken, hollow, barely open, locked onto Marcus. Then onto Shadow. And his cracked lips formed a single word that shattered every piece of Marcus's heart. "Shadow." The dog lunged forward, pressing his body against the boy, licking his face, whining and crying and refusing to let go. Tommy's small arms, weak as paper, wrapped around Shadow's neck. "You came back," Tommy whispered. "You came back for me." Marcus couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He just held his radio to his mouth and managed 2 words. "I found him." If you're sobbing right now, drop a loudly crying face below. And if your heart just exploded when Tommy said, "You came back," type "Hero Dog" in the comments. Shadow never gave up. Not for 1 second. Not ever. Marcus tore away the last of the branches covering the shelter's entrance, his hands bleeding, his uniform soaked with sweat and mud. What he found made his breath catch in his throat, not from horror but from the sheer impossible miracle of it. The shelter was no bigger than a child's closet, built into the hollow beneath a massive fallen oak tree. The walls were woven from branches, packed with mud and leaves for insulation. Inside, a pile of pine needles served as a bed. Empty candy wrappers lay scattered in one corner, the kind that came in Halloween variety packs. A plastic water bottle, cracked but still functional, sat beside a small pile of acorns and berries. Tommy Morrison had survived here. For 8 weeks. A 7-year-old child had built this shelter, rationed whatever food he could find, and refused to die. But it was what Marcus saw clutched in Tommy's other hand that broke him completely. A photograph. Worn and water-stained, the edges curled and torn, but still visible. A woman with kind eyes and a bright smile, her arm around a younger Tommy, both of them laughing. And beside them, a puppy's shadow, maybe a year old, all paws and floppy ears. "Mom," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible, like wind through dead leaves. His eyes, glassy with fever, struggled to focus. Shadow found Mom? Marcus's throat closed. He couldn't speak. Couldn't tell this child that his mother's body had been found 3 weeks ago in a ravine 2 miles from here. That she'd been dead since the night of the invasion. That she'd fought her attacker with everything she had but lost. That the coroner said she'd been trying to run toward something when she fell. Toward her son. Trying to get back to her baby. "We're going to find your mom," Marcus lied, his voice gentle as a prayer. "Because sometimes mercy matters more than truth. But right now we need to get you safe, okay, buddy? Can you tell me what hurts?" Tommy's lips trembled. Everything. Cold. So cold. His whole body shook with violent tremors, hypothermia and dehydration and starvation all conspiring to shut down his small frame. "Shadow tried to keep me warm. He stayed every night. But then he stopped coming and I thought nobody would find me." Shadow whined and pressed closer, his head on Tommy's chest, and the boy's fingers weakly tangled in the dog's matted fur. "Shadow went to get help," Marcus said, carefully checking Tommy's pulse. "Weak, thready, but there. He never abandoned you. He ran for miles looking for someone who could save you. And he found me. He's been trying to lead us back here for 8 weeks. Tommy's eyes filled with tears that spilled down his dirt-crusted cheeks. "He's a good dog. He's the best dog that ever lived," Marcus choked out. The sound of boots crashing through brush erupted behind them. Back up, finally. Paramedics with stretchers and medical bags. Search and rescue with blankets and emergency supplies. But Marcus didn't move. He stayed right there, his hand on Tommy's shoulder, bearing witness to the end of the longest night any child should ever have to survive. Officer Chin? One of the paramedics, Sarah, he knew her from other calls, knelt beside him, her face going pale when she saw Tommy. "Sweet Jesus. How long has he been out here?" 8 weeks, Marcus said. The words sounded impossible even as he spoke them. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, wrapping Tommy in thermal blankets, starting in 4-line. "He's severely dehydrated, hypothermic, malnourished. We need to get him to County Hospital immediately." "But Marcus..." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "This kid built a shelter. He survived. He's a fighter." "He had help," Marcus said, looking at Shadow, who refused to leave Tommy's side even as the paramedics worked. He was never alone. They lifted Tommy onto the stretcher, and his small hand shot out, grabbing Shadow's collar with surprising strength. "Don't leave me," he begged, his voice breaking. "Please, Shadow, don't leave me again." Shadow barked once, fierce, protective, final. As if to say never. Never again. "He's coming with you," Marcus said firmly, looking at Sarah. "That dog stays with this boy. I don't care what the hospital policy is." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Damn right he does." They carried Tommy toward the trail, Shadow walking beside the stretcher like a guardian angel with fur and a limp. And Marcus followed behind, his radio finally silent, his heart finally able to beat without breaking. 8 weeks. The longest night. And finally, morning had come. If you're crying so hard you can barely see, drop a broken heart below. And if you believe Shadow deserves a medal, type hero in the comments. Some angels have 4 legs and never, ever give up. County Hospital's emergency room doors burst open at 3:47 p.m. Tommy Morrison, wrapped in thermal blankets, and 4-line running into his small arm, was rushed past the waiting area on a stretcher. Doctors and nurses swarmed around him, their voices urgent but controlled. And right beside the stretcher, limping but refusing to fall behind, was Shadow. Marcus stood in the doorway, covered in mud and blood, and 8 weeks of ghosts finally laid to rest. His radio had been silent for the last 20 minutes. Dispatch had stopped calling, backup had stopped asking for updates. Everyone knew. The missing boy had been found. Alive. Emma ran to him from the waiting area where a fellow officer had brought her, her pink bow hanging crooked, her overalls dirty from climbing out of the patrol car too many times to watch for her daddy. She crashed into his legs with the force of a freight train, sobbing. "You did it," she cried. "Daddy, you saved him." Marcus collapsed to his knees, pulled her into his chest, and finally let himself break. Great, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. Relief. Exhaustion. Grief for a mother who'd never see her son grow up. Joy that Tommy would get that chance. All of it poured out of him in that sterile hospital hallway while his 6-year-old daughter held him like she was the parent and he was the child. "We saved him, baby girl," he whispered into her hair. "Shadow saved him. We just listened." 3 hours later, after Tommy had been stabilized, after the 4 fluids had brought color back to his cheeks, after the doctors confirmed he'd make a full recovery, Marcus returned to the gas station at mile marker 47. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that felt too beautiful for a day that had held so much darkness. The cardboard sign was still there, propped against the propane cage. "Dog for sale, $3. But Walter was gone. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the sign trembling in his hands, and he understood. Walter had known. Somehow, that broken old man had known his part in this story was finished. He'd kept Shadow alive long enough to find Marcus. He'd brought him to the exact place at the exact time. And then he'd disappeared, like an angel who'd completed his mission. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the station. "This is Chin. I need a bolo out for a homeless man, approximately 65 to 70 years old, goes by Walter Green. Last seen at the gas station on Highway 49. If anyone finds him, tell him." His voice cracked. "Tell him Tommy's going to be okay. Tell him he's a hero. And tell him he's got a hot meal and a place to stay waiting for him if he wants it." He tucked the cardboard sign into his patrol car, a reminder, a memorial, and drove back to the hospital where Tommy was sleeping peacefully for the first time in 8 weeks, Shadow curled up on the floor beside his bed, one paw resting on the boy's hand through the bed rail. The nurse on duty, a woman who'd been working there for 30 years, just shook her head when Marcus arrived. "We tried to remove the dog 3 times. The boy screamed. So we're calling it medical necessity and letting it slide. That dog's not going anywhere." Marcus smiled, the first real smile in 8 weeks. "No, he's not." That night, after Tommy's grandmother arrived from 3 states away, after she'd collapsed beside her grandson's bed sobbing his name, after the doctors confirmed he'd be released in a week, Marcus sat in his car with Emma beside him and Shadow in the back seat. "Daddy," Emma said softly, "can Shadow come home with us?" Marcus looked in the rearview mirror at the dog who'd run through hell to save a child he loved. At the scarred neck and torn paw and eyes that had seen too much but never quit. At the hero who'd been sold for $3. "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus whispered. "He's already home." Shadow's tail wagged once. Slow. Deliberate. Like a soldier finally allowed to rest. Because some missions never end until everyone makes it home alive. And finally, after 8 weeks of fighting, 8 weeks of loyalty, 8 weeks of refusing to give up, Shadow's mission was complete. If this story changed you, drop a red heart in the comments. If you believe loyalty like Shadow still exists in this world, type hero dog. And if you're going to hug your dog a little tighter tonight, type never give up. Share this story. Let it travel. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to know that miracles still happen. That heroes come in all shapes. And that love, real, unconditional, unbreakable love, never, ever quits. Tommy Morrison spent 8 weeks in darkness, but Shadow never stopped believing in the light. And neither should we. Thank you for witnessing this journey. Thank you for believing. And thank you for being here when it mattered most. If you want more stories that restore your faith in humanity, subscribe. Because this world needs more Shadow, more Walter, more people who refuse to give up even when everyone else already has.